Welcome to this session about Application Saasification. My name is Henrik. I worked in Microsoft since 2002. Various roles, various projects. For the past year, I've been working on this application team where we are focusing on application classification, simplification. So, what will we be talking about today? Well, obviously, what is application saasification? We're going to show some examples from the product. Then we're going to sprinkle it with some demos of how you can apply saasification using extensions so that you can make some cool saasifications as well. And hopefully at the end of it all, we will have some time for Q&A. So we would like to talk about what we put into it, the rules, the guiding principles for applying simplifications on an existing product. But before that, with me on stage is also Tommaso. You want to introduce yourself, maybe?
Hello, my name is Tommaso Pimpo. I've been a software engineer in Microsoft for 1.5 years. Most of my work revolves around bringing NAV functionality to SaaS and also simplification with the aim of improving the user experience. Today, during this presentation, I'm going to show you a couple of saasification examples in the form of extension v2. But before that, Henrik is going to introduce the concept of saasification and how we at Microsoft have dealt with it in the last year.
Yeah.
Henrik.
Thank you. So, application saasification is not so much about refactoring functionality inside the product per se, but it's more about refactoring the user experience or simplifying the user experience. So I came across this presentation I attended at one point with Jakob Nielsen, who is famous for UX and some thinking about that. And he mentioned this example of the airplane industry during the 60s where they had some severe crashes that were all caused by human error. So obviously they summoned their engineering team to look into this, and the engineering team went through all the individual controls inside a cockpit. You know how that looks. But they couldn't really find any bugs in the individual controls as such. But then they started to look at the context of how the controls were actually placed inside the cockpit. So you would have things like this is your captain speaking and dump all fuel, and they would sit right next to each other. So you can imagine right after takeoff, you would go, this is your captain speaking. Oops, we just accidentally dumped all fuel. So obviously they started to look into how they could divide these controls in a better way and basically make the experience much better and much safer. Anyway, to some extent, application saasification has some similarities to this. It's not, we don't dump airplanes from the sky, but in terms of how we make a better product for our users. So it's not about refactoring the underlying functionality, but what this is not about is saasification in general. It's not about taking the whole product and then turn that into a SaaS solution like with the platform, and as we saw this morning in the keynote, basically doing all the infrastructure. That's not what this is about. So we want to make the product more intuitive, easy to use and approach, and we went through an exercise of reducing number of fields that are available. You can see one example here on fixed assets where we reduced some of the fields in the general fast tab. It's also about becoming productive faster for our users, making the users feel successful. Maybe also introduce some better arrow dialogues. And then it's also about introduce guidance like adding notifications. And just to recap on notifications, it's a less intrusive way to basically hand the user some guidance in the same context that they're in. And it also means better feedback during data entry and faster recovery from mistakes. It's also about looking at processes that we can shorten or make even simpler. Here it can be using a wizard or assisted setup. It can also be offering different capabilities for the users. In this one image up here, it's like when a user is creating a sales order, they run out of stock. Now, from within the sales order, they can actually go and create either purchase orders or purchase invoices, but purchase orders for different vendors and different items. And finally, we also think it's about the ability to create different experiences reusing the same objects. So, where are we now? Or rather, where did we start? So if we look at the blue part of this is basically standard NAV when this effort started. The x-axis is basically the full application feature set, and then y is our aspiration. We think it's easy to use, but we want to make it super easy. So with that in mind, we obviously had these aspirations and ambitions, but as always, reality showed us that it slowed us down significantly. It was a lot of work actually to make these changes, and that's one of the interesting parts about making things simple. Is actually a lot of work. So where are we? Where are we at now? This is roughly where we're at with the Tenerife scope. I put up something here called Saasification level 1. I'll come back to that, what that actually means. But in the essence of time, we actually had to cut back. Level 1 is the lowest level of our bar, so to say. So that's where we're currently at. And then just a quick representation of the feature scope. Not sure you can all read this, but I won't pay too much attention to it. Just bear in mind that this doesn't represent the actual product because we keep adding and keep changing what we are implementing. So what did we do? So we use experience tiers, application areas. We've been through a lot of existing NAV functionality, so this was not about, again, adding new features. We're also working on making it easier to add Saasification using extensions. That's also an ongoing effort with the new developer experience. And then in collaboration with a select set of users and program managers and our UX team, we also formalized the process around improving and simplifying the application. So in this image, what you're seeing here is the program manager's heat map. It basically shows what we should start with when we took on this mission. What are the most important features we could possibly start with? And then engineering, we took a stab at how we could then build a system to basically manage this transformation for each of the features included. Take them from an on-prem, put them into a SaaS solution. So we broke that into 3 layers in summary, basically. This is what basically adds up the journey for Saasification in this part of it. At the first layer, we have the experience tiers, as I mentioned. They set the experience per company. For each of these experiences, we have a number of application areas, which is also the next layer, that are tied to them to make up a feature set, like we had in the heat map before. And application areas, I mean, it's a familiar concept, but it's basically a taxonomy for mapping our controls and actions to the various experience. And that way tailor basically existing pages to match more specific scenarios that we also identified as part of this process. And lastly, the Saasification guiding principles with the 3 different levels in it was basically done for us to apply further simplifications. And so just to start with experience tiers inside the product, you start by selecting either basic or suite, and then we, based on that, we map these application areas to that given experience. So when we look at that, the basic role center for a business manager in Dynamics 365 Tenerife. We had these two experiences, the basic and the suite, and here you can see the role center for the business manager. It has less functionality if you compare it to the suite one. For each feature, this has to be determined to best support the users, because there's always the risk that a role center can just be plastered with features and feature diagrams and whatnot. But again, it's still about making it simple while still offering sufficient functionality. So a quick recap again for the experience tiers. Used to define the functionality available per company. For now, we introduced the two experiences. In order for this to work, you have to map application areas to controls on a page using tagging. And then runtime, the application basically pairs on a string to the platform with the controls that are enabled, and then we return the set of controls. So let's just quickly look into application areas. You can have any number of application areas. And Tommaso will shortly demo how you can add these application areas using the extension. And on the team, a lot of our time went into actually tagging the various features for either basic and suite to begin with. And later on, we also added more of these feature tags. So for instance, on this one, we have prepayments on the sales order page. We simply add the tag prepayments. It's done using spreadsheets and data, program managers, and then they basically decide what to put in, and then they decide which controls we should make visible. And then inside the product, we have, like in basic, you have no prepayments, and then in suite, you have this. So in other examples of where we added application areas and experiences, is basically if you look at filter types on a sales order, for instance, in this case, we have the types. So in the old one, you had all the different line types listed. Then when we went in and tagged it, we had a basic experience that basically filtered out what is not included in basic, like fixed assets or item charges. And then in the suite experience, we had everything available that we had already tagged. So this is one way that we can use this application areas to basically create a more sort of user-friendly data entry experience, because now you can only see what you actually can work with instead of having everything. You can basically filter out things. So with that in mind, I would like to pass it on to you, Tommaso, to
thanks.
show us a demo.
So before I show the code, I'd like to spend a couple of words in regard to what's the state of application today. What am I going to show you now? It's still a work in progress, and as such does not represent the current state of the application. And as it happens for anything under development, it might be subject to change in the future. We have a plan to release it soon, but we don't have an header yet. With that being said, I'm gonna jump to the example. In this example, we are going to lay down the foundation for an extension using the application area. And we will do that by adding and enable an application area, extend an experience tier by adding new application areas and modifying existing ones, and finally we'll be validating the application area and the experience tier. So I have prepared solution in Visual Studio Code in the modern development environment. For those of you that have been, there was an earlier session today explaining it, but for those of you that don't know about it, it's basically the place where now you develop the extension V2. So I don't know if you can see the text back in the back row, but tell if you can't. I will increase the font size. In this example, we are extending the customer list. At this point, we are adding, at line 7, we are adding a new field, the example field, which is followed by a series of attributes. And I want to point out your attention to line 10, which has the application area attributes to which we assign the example application area that has been added by this extension. This is very important because if your extension fail to use application area in any controls or action, they will not be visible if you are using an experience tier. At the bottom of this file, we are using the open page trigger, and we are showing a simple message, and we show the message only if the application area is enabled. So now, before I show you all the groundwork that's behind the experience here, the application area, I'm going to run the demo just to see it working. And then we're going to see the code, the rest of the code. It's going to take a couple of seconds. So we got our message right before the page is displayed for the first time. And when I press the OK, we get the page. We get our example field on top. It's empty because there's no data. And we can go back to the code. So how do you add an application area? That's done right here by extending the application area setup table. That's very simple. You just add a new field, a new Boolean field, and the name of this field will be used in the attribute that you want to tag with this application area. And this particular case, the example application area, is a bit of an exception because I'm using spacing inside it. And you might have noticed that spaces are omitted in the application area attribute. If I quickly jump back to the previous example, you can see here, example application area has no space. So now our extension has an application area, but it needs to enable it in order to work. And that's done inside a code unit of subtype install, like this one. And we do that inside the onInstall upper company trigger. Again, the code, very simple, does nothing else than enabling the application area if it's not already enabled. So now we have the application area, but still our extension will not be working unless we register this application area inside an experience tier. And in this code unit, I will show you how to do that. So that is done inside one of the onGet experience application areas. We have different versions of this event, one for each experience tier. And in this case, we chose to use the suite because we want our extension to be visible inside the suite experience tier. And the event exposes us a temp record to the application area setup table. And the only thing you need to do to enable the application area is just to set it to true. This event is particularly important because it's called every single time an experience tier is reset. And that can happen for any reason. It could happen because a user is switching back and forth between application areas, or it can also happen because of an upgrade. And if your extension fails to subscribe to this event, to enable the application area inside here, then it will probably end up being disabled. Another thing that you might want to do inside these functions is to modify the experience tier. You can actually modify other application area. You might be, for example, creating an extension that extends the fixed asset, in which case you might want the fixed asset to be enabled if you are running your extension inside an experience tier that does not have fixed asset enabled by default. Or on the contrary, if your extension is supposed to replace fixed asset, you might want fixed asset to be disabled. At line 12 here, we are subscribing to the unvalidated application areas, which, as the name suggests, is used for validating the application areas inside the unexperienced tier. Why do you need to do that? It's because, as some of you might know, there is no guarantee on the order of execution of events. That means that what you have here, what you're doing here inside this function might not reflect the final state of your experience tier. You might have another extension with another subscriber that gets executed right after your subscriber and disable one of the application areas that are required for your extension, leaving your extension in a state, in a non-functioning state, in which case you might want to notify the user. And that's exactly what we're doing here at line 15, from 15 to 17. We just check if we are in the presence of suite. Then, if our application area is not enabled, we just display an error. So, to summarize what we saw in this example, we added an application area on the app area setup table by simply extending it with a new Boolean field. We enabled the new application area inside a code unit of subtype install into an install app per company. And then we extended the experience tier with a new application area in the onGetExperience app area. And we also saw that in the same event it's possible to modify the experience tier, and that event is very important because it gets called every single time an experience tier is reset by an event in the system. And then we validated the application areas. And finally, I want to remind you to always tag your controls and action, because otherwise they will not be visible if your extension is working under an experienced tier. I'm going to give the work back to Henrik for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks. Thanks, Tommaso. So, yeah, I want to wrap up on application areas. So, just some pros and cons. It's nice to have the ability to tailor the experience using application areas. So that's where it's very helpful. It's also we can reuse the same objects, so we don't have to sit and build different experiences using different page objects, for instance. Some of the cons is basically mistakes will happen. It's a huge project to tag all these features, tag all these controls, make sure that it all works in the various combinations that we can think of. And obviously every single control, as I mentioned, has to be tagged. So for application areas, you will have access to this presentation afterwards. There's a link up here for the white paper on the same, if you're interested. So I want to talk about the Application Saasification, sort of the last part of what we went into, and we decided to go for a bar, which is about sort of adding the final touch for these features in terms of providing guidance, wizards, minimize the number of controls available, actions, and just in general give it a scrub on the functional side as well. This is not about the UX part that was mentioned at the keynote this morning. You saw the nice new Tenerife UX experience. That this is not related to it. This is more an attempt to make the product more light, reduce the learning curve for our users, and in general make them have a better, more coherent experience when they use NAV, especially for new walk-up users. To be consistent in that approach, that's why we basically went about to create these 3 levels to ensure that we wouldn't have certain areas that would only receive parts of it, like we wouldn't do the ribbon updates in that part, but we would do the ribbon updates in the other one. Could be between sales and purchase orders, which would be maybe a strange experience. So to be consistent, we added this, and that then went into become part of the whole process of grooming these feature areas. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold these days. So we also quickly discovered that engineering these, the difference between level 1 and level 2 is a factor of 100% in terms of the time that went into it. But anyway, let's proceed with the individual levels. So in level 1, this is basically mandatory for Dynamics 365 Tenerife. Otherwise, it will not be visible without these steps. So again, it's about adding the application area to an experience tier, but there's also a slightly longer list than I put up here. But it is things about adding the right permission sets and map these to user groups. So it's part of the plan. When you open it up, we updated the help, including tooltips. But there's also adding things to the role center, as I mentioned. What profile should it be? Business manager role center, for instance. And then we did a lot of additional testing, even on this level, of course. So on level 2, we go slightly deeper. We're also, in this case, we are trimming back a bit on the fields. Often we would just go into show less mode. We rearrange some of the ribbon actions without hopefully introducing too much intrusive changes. We all know that when you have a certain pattern in the way you use the system, when we all of a sudden start rearranging everything, it might even confuse users. So with that in mind, we also introduced some basic telemetry for most of our features. And this is telemetry on the usage of the features. It's not about what people type into our data as such. So if we move on to the next one, we had the level 3. That's everything we could think of in the bundle, what we thought into application saasification in around this time frame. There could obviously be more things we could look at, but the ambition level, again, as I started out by showing you on the where we're at with the different diagrams, we kind of realized along the way that it was ambitious enough already. So from an engineering point of view, it's also about, I mean, you can see that this is all the features, or a lot of the features at least for NAV. And the capabilities within the team is not necessary that we have all the knowledge about all these different areas. So it's also kind of a journey for us to actually relearn a lot of these various processes and parts of the products. So level 3, adding more guidance for the user, like assisted setup or wizard. It's also some examples here, like from fixed assets, where we went and reduced the fields, ribbon simplifications, as I mentioned, more guidance, direct links for users on the role center. We also introduced things like the tours, for instance, that help users basically guide them to get started with the system. I also want to show some of the assisted setup or wizard examples. So for instance, migrating data from another system, like QuickBooks, was wrapped inside a wizard, making it easier to get going, also with some instructions along the way. Another example is sales tax setup, which is also possible to complete using a wizard and eliminating some uncertainties as a new user. It's all about giving them that sense that when you've done a wizard and it says you're all good, then you have a certainty that you are successful in what you're doing. And then another example is from the fixed assets, where we have this, again, the notification. So a user types in a new fixed asset. The notification pops up and asks if you would like to acquire this fixed asset. And then if you click yes, you start with this acquisition wizard. Some other examples is what I also mentioned earlier, the sales order to purchase order, which is also a good way for, first we announce to the user that you're out of stock, and then they can quickly move in and start their purchase process. So I also mentioned something about reducing fields. So if we look at some of the principles, for instance, on a card page, it's all about thinking how we design the information available for the user, what we show up front. It's about thinking of what will the user actually care about first, and then we promote these into the general fast tab, while field that we deemed less important was moved into show more or additional fields. We also had a principle about setting the max amount of fields that we should display, and that's also about being consistent. So now I want to pass it on to you again, Tommaso, basically to show us how to apply some of these principles using extensions.
Thanks. So earlier in our example, we showed how to lay down the foundation, the groundwork for an extension to use an application area. Now we're going to build on top of that example and improve it by adding some other Saasification element. We're going to see how to add a notification and handle the life cycle of the notification, and we're going to see how an extension can promote itself and improve the user experience by using the video and assisted setup pages. Again, I have another solution ready for you. I will have to open it. It's the same as before. It's just a new version, which is adding a new file. The rest of the files are still the same. So this is the new file. I'm gonna show you the code. I'm gonna run the example, publish it, and run it, and we're gonna see the notification in action. So we have the notification on top of our page in the blue rectangle. We have some text, to action, the usual don't show again action, which disable the notification forever. Then we have an example action. If we click it, we see a simple message like before. And if we go to the My Notification page, which is the place where every notification is an entry and where the user actually enable or disable the notification, or in most of the cases re-enable it because he might have hidden it or disabled it through the other action. Yes, and if you click the notification, you actually see it running here. You can test it. And then we have a convenient checkbox and filter on the side. So let's go to the code. And so on top we have some labels which are used inside the notification. We're not gonna explain those, but instead I'm gonna go directly to this part, which is probably the most interesting part, is the on-open page event on the sales invoice. So, and in the body of this function, we are making use of this code unit called Notification Lifecycle Management, This code unit is basically a collector of helpers and factory method for notification. We strongly encourage you to look inside, to learn it, and hopefully use it if you feel like it's useful. And in this case, we are showing and creating the notification with a single call, which is create and send local notification. It takes as first parameter the unique ID of the notification, and this get example notification ID is just an helper function defined here at the end of the file that returns a GUID. And as a second parameter, it gets a record ID, which is used to couple the notification with a specific record in case you have multiple pages with the same notification open. And the third one is the text that appears on the notification, and the one after is the clickable text for the action. And finally, we have the action itself, which is made of the code unit containing the procedure and the name of the procedure, which is this example notification action, which is here at the bottom of the file. And so you might also have noticed that I didn't declare any do not show again action that comes with the factory method. Instead, here at line 25, we have the initialized notification. This has with default state. This event, your extension needs to subscribe to this event in order to initialize the notification in case, and if you don't do that, your notification might be disabled if there is a reset that's run in the system. Again, inside the body of the function, we make use of the notification lifecycle management. This time we use the set notification default state for current user. That, contrarily to what the name suggests, it does not only set default state, but it also adds a new entry to the my notification page. I know it's a bit confusing. As a matter of fact, the first parameter it's the ID again, and the second one is the text in the my notification page. The third one is a tooltip text, and finally we have the default state for the notification. Yes. So to summarize what we've seen, a notification should always be initialized inside the own initializing notification with default state. And a way to set the default state is through the set notification default state in the notification lifecycle management. And I want also to remind you, we encourage you to use and familiarize yourself with the notification lifecycle management code unit. So I have here another example, which is about using the video list in the assisted setup. And in this example, we're going to see how to add entries in the assisted setup page and in the product video page. I'm going to load now the other solution. And like before, I'm going to publish and run it before we go into the code. So we are in the assisted setup page. You can see every one of these entries is an assisted setup. And in particular, the one here at the bottom is the one that our extension adds. I think the text is a bit small. I can probably resize it. Yes. So we have our assisted setup. He has a state in below, not started because we haven't run the assisted setup yet. And if we click it, we get an example assisted setup that we have created inside our extension. And if we want to see the video list, we can actually go to the home page And here, in the product videos page, at the very bottom, we have added a new category and a new video. And of course, if I click the video, there's some videos showing up. It's a random video taken from our application, so nothing special. So back to the code. So at line 7, we have this event or register assisted setup from the aggregated assisted setup table, which is the one used for adding the new entry to the assisted setup. The event exposes a temporary record on the same table. That's the one that's used for populating the page. And on line 10, you can see that from the same table, we are calling a method for adding the entry, which is the add extension assisted setup. It's, again, very simple, just one call. The first parameter is the ID of the page. It's followed by the text in the entry, the visibility state after that, a record ID to couple again, the initial status, and the icon name. And line 19 here, we have instead the other event that's used for the product video page, and it's the on-init buffer from the product video buffer. Surprise. This one again is very similar to what we saw before. For the system setup, it exposes a temporary record, the same that populates the table, the page, and it also exposes a series of helper methods. In this case, we are using the add category to add a new category, and the add video to category to add the video. The first one here takes the record as first parameter and the name of the category as last, and the video to category takes the record, the name of the video, and a link to the video itself, and it reads the category from the record itself that was populated by the add category call. So to sum up what we saw in this demo, the important parts is that a new entry in the system setup page can be added by subscribing to the or register assisted setup, and that event exposes a series of methods on the same table, and we can use aggregated assisted setup, the add extension assisted setup, to add a new entry, while for adding a new video to the video list, we make use of the on-init buffer event in the product video buffer table, and again we make use of the method exposed by the same table in our example, add category and add video to category. I'm gonna give you the word back to Henrik.
Yeah. Thanks, Tommaso. Let's see. Oh, I think that's right. Yeah, so these are good examples of basically how we are now extending this out so it can be done using extensions built for Tenerife as well. So thanks for that, Tommaso. You will come back later on with yet another demo. But I just want to talk about the ribbon simplifications that we also went through. And this is basically to try and help our users quickly get an overview and to simply reduce the number of tabs we have on the ribbon when possible. And again, this of course has to happen with a lot of respect for the current processes and capabilities in the ribbon. So this slide, it's basically an attempt to show some of the general thinking about cleaning up the ribbon. So if we look at the lowest part of the image, the home tab basically, you can see the different action categories that we are dealing with. We have the home tab, we have which contains all the managed actions. We have process, navigate, report, and then anything context specific. So our objective was to move as much as possible into the home tab from the other three sort of main tabs which makes up the ribbon currently. So anything we could move from the action tab into the home tab and then put those into the process category, that was basically the attempt we went through. So we did the same for the navigate tab and the report tab, and so in general the principles are that the manage tab is for actions that are related to creating, editing, deleting a record, where the action tab is reserved for actions that manipulates or creates data, and it should also provide feedback once an action is completed to the user. The navigate tab, or the related info items tab, is basically containing an action whose sole purpose is to open a relevant or related page, not a dialogue, and it shouldn't have any apparent side effects. And then finally the report tab, which, yeah, it's an action for running reports, either directly or through a request page or dialog page. And then there's just a small example I pasted in here of reopening. The reopen action, it's sitting in the process promoted category, and it is set to promoted only. So that's basically how we move them around inside the code. So with that in mind, we applied sort of we had to rewrite the action tree a bit, make some adjustments. We did this based on UX had some recommendations for how we could basically traverse the various actions on each of the ribbons for all pages. So, like just a small example, we had on the sales invoice, we had customer from the managed part, but should rather be on the navigate or related information, so we simply moved it over. Another small example is moving an action like the release, which was on actions, and then on the action tab, and then move that to the home tab as a promoted only. And that way we simply went through the exercise of reducing the various tabs, moving as much as we could that would make sense to the user, in our opinion, into the home tab. And of course we have been careful, we believe, in not being too intrusive in this exercise. Time will tell, I guess. So just some guiding principles for ribbon pages, like, or design principles you could say. It's again, promote new, promote the setup action, focus on the context of the card page when looking at navigation, be generous with promoted only, it's quite good. Clean up the tabs, don't leave in single actions on a tab. So we also, in that process, we also realized that we had a number of pages now where you only had one action in a tab, making it, should we say, less useful to actually have to navigate first and then just find one action in there. So in that case, we moved it all to the home tab. So here is the just a snapshot of our decision tree that we use to formalize some rules around rewriting list page ribbon actions. I won't go into too much details. I also think it's fairly small font, but this is basically the way that we remain consistent. So just a couple of key takeaways from this, or from our process. It's a lot of work to make features simple, it's a process where we often had to go in and build multiple prototypes just to try them out and test them out with both UX and also a select group of end users, and simply figure out what would work the best. And that, so it becomes sort of a iterative process where we keep reinventing sort of the wheel and keep changing and making new decisions about what makes most sense in this case, and how do users actually perceive the system when they just walk up and use it. One thing is to take a very skilled or trained user comparing to somebody who may be used to a different system, and then compare the two. One of the things we also discovered was that it was actually fun to re-engineer these experiences, because when we looked at some of the, for instance, the dialogues that we throw in the face of our users, we also realized that it can be quite difficult to feel successful in using NAV at that point, in our opinion. So we also wanted to test out various ways to be less intrusive, like adding these notifications, giving them wizards to help finish these setup tasks that are often can be cumbersome for new users. And then we also, of course, spend some time thinking about how can we actually make our users become more productive using Tenerife, which is, we think, very important. Yeah, but now, Tommaso, it's actually you again.
Oh, really?
Without further ado, take it over.
So we saw a couple of examples before. We've seen how you add a new application area, an experience tier, which was the foundation for building an extension using an experience tier. Then we saw simplification, their life cycle, then the video set up, and then to conclude this session, I'm going to show you how to extend a wizard. So for some of you that might have worked with the wizard before might know that extending wizard in the past was particularly difficult. They were not really extension friendly. Like adding on a page was a tremendous amount of work. Well, now things have changed, or at least we have tried to make wizard extendable and to align the experience to extend one with what you have with extending any other page. So in this example, I'm going to show how you can add new steps to a wizard, how steps can be initialized and ordered inside the wizard, and finally we're going to see how the controls that you add in each of the steps can be validated. Again, as before, I have a new version of the same project. I'm going to load it. But actually this time around I'm going to show you the wizard first. We are extending the fixed asset acquisition wizard. And I'm going to take a shortcut to show it to you because I don't want to go through all the steps to show it.
But isn't it simple, Tommaso?
It is. So this is the fixed asset acquisition wizard. You have an intro page, and you have the navigation buttons below. Like in every other wizard, you get to the next page, to the second page, you have some controls. Then you get to the third page, there's some validation to be done, and the button below gets disabled. So you insert something, anything, and we get the next enabled again. Finally, we get to the final page. The next button is disabled. You get the finish button, a different icon on top. that signals that this is actually the final page. So let's extend it. So this is a page extension, and at line 7, I'm adding a new steps, my step 1. By convention, steps are represented as group. You can put whatever you want inside the group, and it gets displayed according to what you press with the navigation button when they get enabled. Inside this group, we have a field that shows the current step we are at. We have a caption, not very important. And we have a visibility attributes that's controlled by some variable. Then after that, we have I've added some other steps. I've added my step 3 here, another group, exactly the same as the one before, with a field showing which step we are at, and one last step here, my last step at the end. The visibility of each of these steps is controlled by a variable, like I said before, and the variable are defined here at the bottom of the page, and they are updated inside the onAfter get record through a call to get current step, which returns the name of the step. Get current step is inside the parent wizard. And as convention, our convention is to use as name of the step the same name as the same name of the group. Now, this is something I wanted to show you in this demo, but I couldn't because a change we were working on couldn't make it on time. But I was told this morning that we actually have it now in the code. Unfortunately, I cannot show it today. But now there's the possibility for an extension to use expression inside the visibility attribute, which means that all this code you are seeing here in this section and all these variables, they are gone. So you'll end up having inside the visibility attribute the comparison operator with the two variables to be compared. So back to the actual code. So now we have our wizard. We have the steps. We have a way to control their visibility, but the wizard is not yet aware that these steps have been added. There's no way you can control them through the navigation button. And the way, so you need to register the steps somehow into the wizard, and that's done inside this code unit. So here we have an event on any steps, which is exposed by any wizard, and the event has as a parameter a linked list containing all the wizard's name. And inside this section of code, we are actually modifying the entire wizard. So in the first line, we're removing the intro wizard. In the second line, we're adding our first step as the first step of the wizard. In the third one, we're adding my step 3 after FA details. FA details, you might not know it, but it was the second step in the wizard I showed you before. And then we add my last step as the very last step of the wizard. So now we also have registered the steps, but it still needs to have a way to validate the controls that we eventually had inside the steps or the existing step. So that is done inside this other event at line 12, the onValidate current step. This is a bit more complicated when it comes to parameter. It exposes the record, the source record for the page, some text representing the current step, and finally a Boolean var, which represents the return value of the event, and that's used for enabling and disable the navigation button you see below. In the body of the function, we don't do anything special. We just switch over all the steps, and then you can put whatever code you want inside here and set the step is valid, the return value of the function. And as I said, you will get the navigation button enabled or disabled accordingly. So now I can actually publish and run the demo. We're going to see the result. Okay. So this is our first page. The step here says my first step. So it's actually our first step, and we no longer have any text from the previous wizard. If I press next, we get what it was the second page before. And if I press next again, I get my step 3. So we can continue, and we get again validation. We get validation again. And then it was followed by the final step of the wizard, if you remember. And in this case, it's no longer the final. We no longer have the icon that we had before that was signaling the end of the wizard. The next button is not disabled. And we actually have another page, and that's actually my last page, the page that I just added in the wizard. So to summarize what we saw in this example, you can add new steps to a wizard by adding new groups representing the step, or modifying existing one in the same way as you would do with any other element in a page. You can update the visibility of the step by reading from the get current step exposed by the parent wizard. The steps are registered through the onInit step event, again exposed by the parent wizard, and the validation is done inside the onValidate current step. So I'm going to give the word back to Larry for the final part of the presentation.
Yeah. So we're actually in good time, I would say. But basically, to summarize what we showed you today, we talked about the application Saasification using the 3 different layers for Tenerife, and how we applied those. We looked at some of the updates we did to the ribbon, and Tommaso also demonstrated how all this can basically be done through the extensions v2. So this basically concludes our presentation. I think we're far ahead, but if there is, there's also time for Q&A for sure. We do have some T-shirts. If anybody has any questions, let us know. Otherwise, there's a question up there.
Throw the cube.
Yeah, we can throw this cube. I just want to give people a heads up before I actually start throwing it, but maybe we can help each other up there. I think it's, yeah. Now I hope it works with all this effort. No sound? Huh?
There's another one coming.
Okay.
Where is he? Ah, oh, there. It's the orange one. You are.
Sounds better.
Yeah.
I have one question. Is it also your job to unify the ribbons or to the consistency of ribbons? What my users are always irritated that the same thing is not on the same position. Example, printout. Sometimes it's on action, sometimes it's on navigate, or for all posting, test report and posting are on different ribbon parts and not always together at the same place. Is this also your job? Then there's still very much to do.
Yes, thank you. That's a good question, and yes, it is part of what we are also doing, looking at as part of this effort. There is a lot to do, for sure, and it's as I also mentioned, there's a lot of ground to be covered yet, but yeah, working on it, doing our best, absolutely. Any other questions? Sorry, one.
Where?
Here.
Front row? Okay.
Good catch.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, my question is about application area setup. Currently it's on objects, on properties. I think it would be much better to move it somewhere to set up or to external file or somehow, but not to keep on objects.
Yeah, that's a good point. We are looking into the future of how we're gonna apply application areas and how it's to the objects, or if we're gonna move it out, or but it's still, for now, we're still gonna go with reside on each of the objects, if I got your question correctly.
So you are thinking about that. Yeah.
We are thinking about it. We do get feedback on this from time to time. I would say as part of this process, we took what was available to us as part of this process. But it is something I know we are discussing continuously. So
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. I think there's one, two.
Yeah.
Well, it might be the different session, but what about shortcut keys? I think that's really what made things simple for the users.
Yeah. Good input.
What are you doing about that?
Not much at the moment. Not for this effort, we're not. But it's a very good input. I'll make a note of it for sure too, together with the rest of the feedback. It's yeah. Do you mind handing out these, or?
Yeah, I can.
And now you will get the question on extensions, Tommaso.
You were talking about 3 levels.
Yeah.
Is there a roadmap for each level, or when do you expect it to be in the application?
Yeah, very good question. At this point, we have, for Tenerife, we have set the bar significantly lower because we are committed to deliver the entire scope, which is take precedence over actually optimizing all the things we would like to optimize. So I don't have a concrete sort of roadmap at this point, but I'd be happy to. We also have a blog, and we're going to post from time to time updates to this, so there will be more information on the process of this. Yeah. Thanks. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question over here, to the right for you.
Yeah.
Oh, to the left. Sorry.
To the left.
To the left.
Okay.
Sorry.
My other right.
Yeah, other right. Whatever. So when I look into the application areas, a lot of some code to create new application areas there. What does the end user see from that? What if I just use application area, basic and suite, to put my functionality into basic or suite application experience tier, how you call that? If I just do that, the end user will have the same experience compared to when I write all this code to create my own application area. So why would I do that? What does that for the end user?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you.
But it's all about being. I mean, we're gonna put in more experience tiers as we go along. As Tommaso also showed, we can also create experience tiers using extensions, and in that you might have a complete different type of solution, but still provided using the standard objects in certain cases. So you can basically build a whole new process around that, a business process, or you can build new role centers. So if you want to be part of the standard package, it's yes, you're absolutely right. Why go ahead and spend the time of actually going through the hoops of creating my own application areas and so forth. So we are applying this as a taxonomy inside the product too, but still it maps to the same experience, you could say.
So what about adding your own experience tiers?
Yeah.
That would make sense.
Yeah, but we can. Tommaso, maybe you can comment on this in terms of the extensions you showed around experience tiers. Or maybe we can say that yes, it will be possible to have your own experience tiers, and then you can add your own application areas to that. That is the objective. But right now it's a lockdown system where we basically define these, and then the whole thing comes down to the application areas. But later on you will be able to extend that. And
okay, right.
Yeah.
One comment, just to repeat what the other guy also said. Currently, application areas are set on page level, controls on page level. That should definitely go to fields in the table instead of on pages.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Made a note of that. Several. Yeah. Okay. There's a question up there. Yeah.
I'll take the blue microphone.
Hello. Hey.
Hello.
I'm here. I don't know if this question is exactly for you. I will try.
Yeah.
I'm facing an issue related to the notification dispatcher. If there is an error, the job queue stops and there is no way to continue, except if someone goes to fix the data. Obviously, starting accumulating pending emails and everything. Is this part of the user experience or not? Just to be clear, in my opinion, should skip that email with the error, maybe write a notification and continue with the queue, not accumulating.
Yeah. It's a good question. Maybe if you have time afterwards, we can just quickly talk, just so I understand the.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Let's do that. Okay. Any other questions at this point? It's otherwise.
There's
What?
someone there.
Oh, sorry.
Just one. What about if you add an application level after we have produced an extension based on, let's say, basic, and you add an area called premium? What's happened to if you reset only on the area basic? Oh.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, you're talking about an
Yeah,
experience tier, not. I mean, if we add a new experience tier, that also includes the fields from the basic experience tier, then if your application area is part of basic, it will also be part of that experience tier. So I don't know if that answered your question. Maybe.
Okay. We can always chat.
We can always discuss it after and.
There is a hierarchy between all the area. You mean the
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a hierarchy.
Because now we just have two levels, but maybe the hierarchy gonna grow with some different branch.
Ah, I see. So yeah, basically, will that sort of taxonomy grow into more like a tree, and then if you can have certain dependencies to other application areas and so forth? We're still debating that. I think that would be the only fair reply at this point. So it's something that we have bumped down basically in terms of scoping. So yeah. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and good questions and comments. So
Thank you.